it's really weird to me that like we still call people with like a phone number. The concept here is we don't want to have a person and a credit card tied to a eSIM. We think that that's very kind of Web 2 thing.
You're now plugged into the Delphi podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Delphi podcast. I'm your host, Tommy. Used to go by Tom Shaughnessy, but I'm trying to shed that name as we move forward. And today I'm thrilled to have on Anthony Levandowski, who's the CEO and co-founder of Pollen. How's it going, Anthony?
Hey, Tommy, how you doing?
Good, man. I'm super excited. It's been announced that we invested in you guys. We've been looking for a project and a team of your caliber for half a decade at this point, as we discussed. So really looking forward to learning more about you and Pollen. But let's start with a bit of background about yourself.
Well, first, thank you for investing and advising us and having me on the show here. I've loved robots since I'm a little kid. Started off making Legos when I was a quarter of my height right now. Love making things that move around in the world on their own. Did some robotic projects from a robot motorcycle that's in the Smithsonian. Was in early in a bunch of other robot projects as well. But most recently, we've launched a venture where we're doing autonomous mining trucks, and that's going great. Except a lot of the mines are really far from civilization, and there's no service connection there. And so we had to come up with a solution to get connectivity to all these vehicles. To be able to control them remotely and dispatch them and get diagnostics. And we tried setting up a Wi-Fi mesh network because that seems like the go-to thing, from our perspective. And it turned out that really sucked and it was hard. So we actually ended up going and building a LTE network, basically cell phone network, because they seem to work pretty well in cities and other places. And that was a game changer for us. It was really awesome. The coverage was through the whole site. We had good bandwidth. It was seamless. We're like, wow, this is the future. And then I got home, and then couldn't get service at my house. And I was like, wait a second. If we can make service work, in this remote location, even far Nevada mines or Alaska and so forth, why can't I get it in San Francisco Bay Area? And so I was like, well, let's bring one of the setups down. We did that, and that was a really cool experience to see, like, wait, if it can work for me, let's go and figure out a way to share this out to everyone. And so in doing that, we're like, wait a second, wouldn't it be great if everybody could build out their own, fixing their own coverage where they don't have reception? So that's kind of how the genesis for Pollen came out. And we're super excited to have you guys on board and go from there.
It's said historically that the best ideas come out of necessity, right? So you're basically, you were trying to get coverage in mines. There was none there. So you thought, hey, let's build our own coverage here. And that's kind of the birth of Pollen.
Absolutely. I mean, necessity is the mother of all innovation. And I'd say here there's a lot of other pieces that were existing. We didn't create the whole thing from scratch. We brought about a bunch of pieces that existed. But nobody really rolled out our own private network that you could just buy equipment online, set it up for yourself. And we wanted to do it in a different way, not just hey, let's fix the coverage for AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, whoever. We thought if you're building this, the real opportunity is not just to fix the little coverage. Let's make a carrier that we all would want, right? And so with that, we're like, well, if we're building this new connectivity places, let's make it where it's private, it's anonymous. It's 2022, so you might as well have it decentralized where everybody owns their own nodes and they're going to get paid for other users that are coming through and using traffic through the nodes. So it's really a nice way to decentralize and make it where it's a community-based cell phone service.
Anthony, tell us a bit about your other company, Pronto. I mean, you guys have some impressive feats. I believe you guys sent, or were one of the first or the first to send a car autonomously across the U.S. Tell us a bit about that too.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we're still the only one, although I suspect that some of the competition will repeat the endeavor soon, to drive cross country in a vehicle with nobody touching any of the controls. Meaning we drove from San Francisco, crossing the Golden Gate Bridge, all the way across to New York, crossing the George Washington Bridge, without any human giving inputs to the car. So we still had a person inside the car, and that was me. It was a very long drive. It's about 3,000 miles. 50 hours or so of driving.
And you have no one to talk to.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, we had like a chase car with supplies and support, and we stayed mostly on the highway. There was a couple exits we had to turn off because we had to take breaks for restrooms and stop. But every time it was, pre-programmed for the vehicle to take this exit, come to a stop here, and wait until a certain time, and then be able to come back and resume. So we didn't take over and drive to the gas station and then fill up and then drive back and then re-engage. It was engage in San Francisco and then take over in New York, where there's stops where you pull off so you can add fuel to the car, get out, stretch your legs a little bit, use the restroom, eat a sandwich, and then sometimes do that near a hotel so you could actually go to sleep, because it's hard to stay up for 50 hours and pay attention, and I wouldn't recommend doing that either.
Yeah, so, no, that's brutal.
Yeah. So that was really a feat. So we like to have big goals, for the team. And so I like the concept of what would it be like if you had a car that could drive across the country on its own? That really changes your thinking. And you're not just trying to make it work down the street. You're okay, our goal is this really big moonshot, so to speak, to reuse, people's phrase there. And it was exciting because at the time, others were trying to do the same thing, and they'd had been announcing it oh, it's going to come in 6 months, so it's coming in 3 months, so it's coming right away. So there was kind of this mini race that happened, and since then the other team kind of I think stopped going in that direction. So
that's awesome. No, it's impressive. It's definitely an impressive feat. I could definitely see why it would be a long drive. So shifting back to Pollen a bit, so there was this necessity that you wanted to fill within your own needs, and you decided to fill that by creating your own wireless networks in these remote locations. You get back to your house, you think, hey, why can't anybody do this? And that's kind of the genesis of Pollen. Walk me through the genesis to initializing this as its own business, its own project. How did you go from the mine in your house to what we recently saw was your largest node drop to date of indoor and outdoor 5G nodes?
Yeah. So the genesis. So I like ambitious goals, and I like iterating and pushing things out, right? So there's a saying of real engineers ship, right? And so I want, our team is full of these real engineers, and they love to deploy and ship things. And so from when we deploy this, at the mine site to say, hey, it's going to work here, to realizing actually it's not just private, LTE for mines. It could be everywhere, that people have either a coverage problem, I don't have any bars, or a capacity problem, like in an airport where there's so many people. You might have 5 bars, but you're getting 1 megabit. So if you're trying to quickly download your boarding pass, at the last second, or fill out your application, for something, it's going to be super slow. So those are the two kind of areas. So we want to push things into the open as fast as possible, and learn from that, get the feedback from the community. And so in doing the launch and having the first drop, we got a lot of feedback of things that we didn't think about, so we've changed the incentives. We got some feedback from you as well, which was super helpful. But the idea is that from when you identify, a piece of technology that could be used for solving a problem, I think it's the getting to that problem and iterating and pushing it out and getting user feedback is the most important thing, so that you can really tune your solution to the market, because you're going to be wrong on so many levels. That the best way to do it is to ship and iterate. So, it's about 1.5 years, 2 years of engineering from start to finish. But once we realized that we had to package the connectivity in order to make it available to others, as opposed to mines, we really worked on making the hardware less expensive and easier to set up. And I think our goal here was really to make it plug and play. So you just received a node and plugged it into power, plugged it into your home internet, and then all of a sudden you were up and broadcasting, and you could show that it was providing coverage.
The iterative process sounds like the way to go, right? I mean, the idea of waiting 1.5 years, 2 years, and then dropping nodes out there in the wild for people to provide wireless coverage. I mean, it seems like you wouldn't get the level of feedback you need to optimize the Pollen network.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's important to me on the iteration, is that your consumers are going to do something with the stuff that you create that you just can't imagine. And if you give them all the tools for it, they'll tell you very quickly, hey, this doesn't work. I have a problem with ABC. And then you go, oh, that's a great idea. We didn't even know that that's what you were doing with it. Let's go fix it. And then some people will be able to go out and deploy and be like, hey, this is fantastic. Now my small community is able to get coverage where we didn't have coverage before because we didn't have enough people and the telcos didn't care about investing $250,000 to set up a site and give service to 500 people, versus here somebody can just spend less than $10,000 and then be providing almost the same service. So that's like, iteration is really the way to go. It means you're going to have some bumps along the way, but as long as you're ready to iterate on that quickly, you're going to do really well. So
yeah, a bump with one person versus a network-wide issue definitely makes more sense.
Yeah, for sure.
So Anthony, to round out just the education introduction, I think it's worth talking about how traditional wireless carriers work. And I definitely want to hear your thoughts here. But my thesis from the Helium days and now the Pollen days has always been that the wireless, what you're targeting is massively beneficial on 5G, right? You don't have to spend billions of dollars climbing wireless towers miles from the house. You don't have to have issues getting inside someone's home, which 5G, it's tough because the signal doesn't travel very far. It's subject to rain, wind, weather, RF windows, stuff like that. So you can get inside the house. And 3, there's no CapEx cost for you guys. And the best part is you're using free spectrum. So you're not spending tens or hundreds of billions in aggregate on spectrum because you're using a free swath known as CBRS. With all of that, how do you view the traditional telco model? And how do you view Pollen as like an absolute step function improvement or change to that?
Yeah, I see the traditional telco model as like taking us a long way, and it's been fantastic. But there's certain things that it's just not suited for, and it's not suited for empowering you to improve the network for your area and your neck of the woods. Right? They're focusing on making the entire country as optimal as possible. And so they're spending their dollars like, well, if we put more dollars here, we're going to cover X number of people. And that's where they're paying and they're getting subscriptions. And it's hard for them to really care about every single individual. And so what Pollen is doing is effectively, I feel like it's kind of changing it's going from like a soup kitchen where everybody gets the same thing to kind of like little franchise boutique, like restaurants and coffee shops where an entrepreneur or some small business owner could be like, oh, I want to have good coverage at my store, right? So recently I was in a grocery store and I was trying to my partner asked me for a type of coffee and I was like, yeah, no problem, I can pick a coffee out. And I got to the coffee place and it was like a wall of 100 choices. So the natural thing is take a picture, send it back and be like, which one do you want? And have them, circle, I want the Dunkin' Donuts, a hazelnut roast or whatever the flavor might be. And I couldn't do that because I didn't have connectivity. And the store had wireless, but I'd have to go walk to the front and then sign in. Is it going to work? There's just so much friction. We live in a world now where friction is really a limiting factor. So here, with Pollen, they could just set one up on their store. It covers their store, a couple of neighbors, and I would get connectivity there. To get a telco to come in and fix that problem for them, they'd have to care. And they're like, okay, how many users are you getting affected by? Is it more than 100,000 a day? He's like, oh, okay, no, probably not. Well, it's not that high priority. And so Pollen is really kind of a step function there where it allows you to take the network into your own hands. And you can provide a better service either for yourself because of your home or your ranch or your friends' places or your businesses, right? Imagine a hotel. Everybody just gets connectivity everywhere. There's no need to sign in on the Wi-Fi and do all these things. And so it's really, one component of it is plugging in the gaps where there's no coverage. The other piece that we think Pollen is really key is, and this is something I think the telcos can learn from a lot is the privacy and anonymity of all the data transfers that we have. And I view my connection to the internet as something that's really private, and you shouldn't really necessarily have others be looking at that. You could choose to share your data with a search provider or anybody who you want to share your data because you're going to get a service for it. But there shouldn't be just because they're providing you the bridge, getting basically a copy of all your the bits that are going through and being able to do whatever they want to monetize on that. So I think the concept of Pollen is really about creating an identity and a bridge between like fixed bandwidth that exists, almost everywhere in the world. There's like fiber and, home internet everywhere. And then your phone, they would like to connect to that. And normally you're connecting to a centrally planned organization that's like creating the coverage and setting it up once. And then if there's a problem and they don't know about it, it's hard for them to tweak and fix it. Where with Pollen, you're able to just like put up your own node and either fix that problem or grow a whole network from scratch and have people be able to be on the private and anonymous network.
So it sounds like the first point is really like a caring thing, right? Like the telcos don't care about providing coverage to the 30 or 300 people in a specific area where it's an issue, but come to Pollen and you can have the person that's servicing that area actually care because their incentives for deploying a node are actually pretty solid, right? I mean, for me, it's the mail room at the bottom of my building. It doesn't sound like an annoyance, but waiting 10 minutes online with no coverage is actually really annoying, right? I wish those guys could deploy a node, and now they kind of can.
Exactly. That's the thing that it would be nice. And we see kind of coexistence with the carriers. This is just kind of an improvement to them, where you can actually have, all the phones now have dual SIMs and dual radios, so you can be on two networks at the same time. And very few people know about that. And so we want them to kind of know they can be on AT&T and Verizon as their main, and then they can have Pollen as their secondary, or vice versa. And their phone will automatically switch to being which one is the best there. And so if you're building and setting it up in the parking garage or in the mailroom or wherever it is, now you have coverage there that just would naturally connect seamlessly for them. And whatever traffic you end up doing there, like the portion of your bill will go towards making their ROI better. We still think the piece here is just making it better for the user experience of your building, of your restaurant, or your business first. And we think the secondary component of you being able to earn from the data traffic and the coverage that you're providing is a nice benefit. But we really think that the value add of like making your life better because you have high speed connectivity wherever you want to put it is the differentiator.
The privacy aspect is also really important. I mean, people get turned off by, the idea that Telegram reads all our messages isn't controlled by, entities. I think we all kind of agree on that at this point. But you're talking about your entire internet experience. That's like one of the core tenets of Web3 to begin with. Why do we not have any semblance of privacy at our entire internet level until now? It's kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think the incentives for the existing carriers have been get the connectivity going, and then from there you can add, it's kind of been an afterthought. I think they've been working on building out their network. And from us, we were like, okay, well, if you're building out a new network, what are some of the values that you would want from that, right? We would want to make it where we're super customer focused and really listening to what the customers do care. And people more and more care about their privacy now. I think 10 years ago was very different. And so it's really just coming of age thing. They might react to it, but right now, we basically encrypt everything from your phone all the way to the exit onto the backbone of the internet. And so we do that so that if you do have, say you're using access in your mailroom down in your building, you wouldn't want the building provider being able to see the traffic that's going there. And so that's really why it's key to be able to have everything exit directly there. Now, that doesn't mean if you're visiting a site that they can't put a cookie on your browser and you can't see all your traffic and so forth, but at least you have a chance versus before you kind of were limited in your options there.
Totally. Makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like there's two different real estate plays going on for Pollen, right? You have the suppliers that you want, you want people in their home deploying nodes to provide wireless coverage in their windows, on their roofs, on their terraces, what have you. And then you also want the users to install either the eSIM or the Honeybee and to actually access the network, and then for some of them to go around also validating it. Let's start with the first one, which is the node suppliers and deployers. How are you convincing people around the world to, purchase a wireless node and then deploy it in their home?
Yep, absolutely. So to make this network successful, obviously we want people to be able to connect to the internet in multiple places. We see Pollen as a bridge between your physical available bandwidth and your set of users that are walking by with their devices, and they don't have an ability to connect and build that bridge. So every place that we put a location that you have a good location with traffic, people would want to put up a, we call them flowers. They're basically a cell phone radio that goes out and provides the LTE coverage to them, so that if you're locally and you have a Pollen SIM, you just naturally attach, just the same way you would attach to existing carriers. And so there's a real estate play there where if you have a good location and you set up, one of our outdoor flowers, you're going to be able to pollinate and basically radiate, provide coverage in a wide area there. So you could think of like the rooftops of buildings and balconies, kind of like, yourself on a nice, high floor there, being able to provide coverage to the courtyard that's behind you there. So everybody that's going there is able to connect to your radio and do so without having to like log in through a Wi-Fi. So in doing that, you want to have, there's a physical connection there. You need power, you need backhaul or just internet, and you need to mount there with the radio connected there. The radios are designed in such a way that they don't require permits because they fall under a specific OTARD regulation that basically means that you're not you don't need a special permit to put that up. And so that's a key aspect of being able to go and find placements to create connectivity and put it out. These radios are low power as well, so it's the range is much more limited than the cell phone towers, and they're also less radiation being emitted from them. We're doing about a 1 watt versus some of theirs are doing 40 and 200 and watts up. So that's
awesome.
Yeah, that's the like physical real estate for where do we create spots to go and radiate and provide the connectivity. You basically think of it like you're extending the physical internet to where the radio can reach by being able to put that up. And so that's interesting. And then the flip side is, there's how do you know that it has coverage there, right? So I'll put up a radio and I say, hey, I'm broadcasting down here. I'm doing, Times Square in New York or Union Square in San Francisco. Well, we can't trust you saying that. I mean, Tommy, we would trust you, but like not everybody who buys equipment, we have a relationship with them there. And so we created a device that we call the Bumblebee. That's a Linux computer that's dedicated towards doing validation. And what this does is that, think of this as a Uber or Lyft driver, or, somebody in their car has this, and wherever they're driving around, they're constantly seeing what the signals from Pollen and other networks are. So with that, you can create a map of where the holes are in the existing carriers and where the Pollen coverage maps. And with that, you can validate. You'd be like, hey, when I'm in your courtyard here, I can connect to Tommy's radio. And with that, do a ping test, do a speed test, and validate that like you're actually providing coverage in this area. And in doing so, we then reward your flower by saying, hey, you're providing coverage in this specific region in the space. And we've broken the world up into like this honeycomb structure. And so, you say your flower is providing coverage in this specific hex. And so then the Bumblebee that went to that hex also gets rewarded because they're like, I was in this location, I was able to connect to the internet, and I was able to get the connectivity that I needed. And so that is how you can kind of validate and create a real estate of where somebody is like providing the coverage and saying it's available, and by the coverage being available, they get a reward on the network for that.
That's awesome. So just to recap, people around the world or around the US right now are purchasing many different types of nodes. The dandelions you can hang in your window, bumblebees, which are much larger, more industrial-like nodes, a couple in between. Buttercup, yeah. And basically they're providing coverage. They're using the real estate they already have, and they're providing wireless coverage. But the other side of this is the validation side. You have one right behind you on your desk, and this was a physical device, but you've since moved that over to be an app on your phone and just to reuse the GPS. So, we think of stuff, projects like STEPN, people running around earning money. But in this scenario for Pollen, you have users either walking around, running around in an Uber, a Lyft, a bike, what have you, with their physical phone validating that nodes are where they say they are.
Correct.
And earning. My question for you is why does the validator nodes have to be separate from the wireless nodes? Why can't the validators be in the wireless node itself?
Yeah, so you can think of it this way: is if you had the nodes themselves, we would call them flowers because we have this whole theme of how the coverage works out from this. So imagine your flower has like a scent, or like the range that it can pollinate from. And you have another flower on the other end that can see that one. That would imply that you can get location, you can get coverage between, at each two flowers location, but maybe not in between or maybe not around. And so because we're creating a mobile network, you want something that actually moves around and like checks all the areas of where you can go. Think of it as like Verizon had a commercial back then. It was like, "Can you hear me now?" And he's like, "Good." And then he like walks 3 feet and he's like, "Can you hear me now?" And it keeps doing this. You can't physically do that by moving your flower around to every single location. And so for that, we wanted to create like a lighter weight. And so the analogy for this in the real world is like you have flowers and these like honeybees and bumblebees come in and like connect to the flowers and pollinate between one to another. So here the idea is that the bumblebee is able to go from flower to flower, and in between them, if they has connectivity, it's able to set up and provide you that information about whether there's flower connectivity there. So in doing so, you can make these coverage maps, and by having a coverage map, you can say, hey, where did this bumblebee go and validate, and which flowers did it validate there? Meaning, like, is there cell phone coverage being bridged in a gap between the two, or is there a dead spot, right? Because just because you have connectivity from flower to flower doesn't mean that it's providing connectivity in between. And ultimately, what we want to do is we want to get users on their phones getting better service and better access. We don't really care that the flowers can see each other. Like, you might have set it up where the flowers are further enough apart that they can provide the cover in between, but they can't actually connect to each other because that's not what we really care about.
That's awesome, Anthony. And I pulled up a coverage map of San Francisco of the current live network right now for those that are watching on the video. And the other idea here, though, is for the validator nodes is to prevent spoofing, right? Like, finding the dead spots, finding the areas that, you're not providing significant coverage to is important, but you also don't want, 10,000 of these nodes in a warehouse somewhere just earning off the network, right? Is that another item that the validator nodes solve?
Yeah, so we wanted to get rid of rid is difficult, but we want to minimize the ability to do gaming. And so by having these validator nodes move around the world, they are able to say, I do get coverage here, I don't get coverage here. And so if somebody's like reporting coverage in a location where they're not, when somebody else comes through and like, I don't get coverage here, then you have like, oh, interesting, maybe this guy's cheating, or maybe there's like something weird that's happening. And so by having this aggregate amount of like where the coverage does exist and doesn't exist, you really can build up a better map of where it is, and that map helps you, from a real estate perspective. On the flower side, you're like, oh, we need coverage down here because we don't have service here right now, and so like that's interesting. And so you're able to really help people drive the coverage to where it's needed as opposed to where it just is. Because if you have a tower and your neighbor has a tower, it's not that useful, right? You'd want he or she to go put that somewhere else to expand the network. And so by doing that, that's why we made it this way to do it. And so from us, we just launched the Honeybee, which is the phone version, and you were talking about a second ago. We think that's a really great way to improve, because you're now getting people using the SIM on their phone. They have it as a backup service. When the app is running, it's reporting the location of where they are and telling us whether they have coverage or not. And so from that, being able to do more. It's not as powerful as the device that we made. So the Honeybee allows you to, we call it dropping pollen, meaning like, I'd like to have service here, even though I don't necessarily have service here today, versus the Bumblebee is able to scan other networks and give more accurate feedback as to what the other connectivity is there. So there's still a need for both, but the Honeybee on the phone is going to be, I think, very transformational in terms of spreading the availability for people to use it. Because so ultimately it's going to be an app you download, an eSIM that you install, and then some 13-year-old in Topeka, Kansas is able to go and map and be like, hey, I want my service here. Here's the places that I go to. If somebody had a flower here, I'd be happy to provide them for my coverage here and not have to be on a full telco.
No, it's awesome. I mean, the consumer aspect of it is incredible, right? Anybody could download this. They can go validate coverage, but you're also getting that feedback loop for suppliers on where you want coverage and where you want nodes deployed. So, I mean, I'm a sucker for physical crypto projects because it's, the unboxing is fun, that Apple experience. When I got my Pollen node, I was just so excited, really eager to deploy it. I wasn't really thinking about my incentives, but walk us through the incentives a bit. Like, what is, a drive for that kid in Topeka, Kansas, or his dad, or what have you, to deploy a dandelion, a buttercup? What are they getting out of this?
Yeah. So the main level that they're getting out of this is that they're providing and they're building their own network. So think of this is an opportunity to like own the next generation. Think of this as a carrier 3.0. Like this is you're owning part of your own network. It's decentralized, so they're providing the coverage to themselves, to their friends. The idea there is that the service at some point that they will go through this, they'll get the rewards for the amount of traffic that they're providing through their network. So that's kind of long term. The reason why this works is that the cost of data for wireless is much, much higher than the cost of data from a fixed standpoint. And so by Pollen helps you bridge that gap, and so you could have your home high-speed internet provider and share 10% of that back and earn much more than it costs to have you for that service. So that's kind of the long-term incentives. You're also providing it in a way that's anonymous and private, and so there's a lot of value for society to have that kind of connectivity. More short-term, what's happening now is we're providing incentives for a proof of coverage. And so by doing this, we are rolling out the network where wherever you can prove that somebody is providing coverage or that you're validating that coverage is being provided there, you get an incentive in the form of PCN, which is a PollenCoin. And what that does is it allows you to pick the best locations where you think there's going to be people and there's going to be more validations happening and more users that are going to be going through. And so there's an idea of like, if you're starting in your region, go ahead and put a bunch of nodes up, give some SIMs, let some people know. As they connect to your network and there's more nodes that connect to you, you get higher rewards. And you can use the PCN token for getting data and getting service yourself. So where this is in the phase 1. In phase 2, we'll launch a data plan where people will be able to pay with their PCNs, but they'll have to pay for the data, on a monthly service or on a per gigabyte service. We're still figuring that out. And so that's really when the rewards will have, meaning beyond just being coins, is that the PCNs will convert into data credits, and you'll need to have data credits in order to be able to connect to the network. So that's where the whole economy really starts happening. And so right now, the reason why you'd want to deploy the technology in your area is because you're interested in providing the service, and you think that in the future there will be a need for a decentralized carrier to be out there, and you want to be, collecting as many of the PCN tokens as you can in order to be able to get as much data credits for later on in use.
Giving out the eSIMs to your friends is an awesome idea, right? Because the node operators are evangelizing their area, but they're not doing it for free, right? Because everyone's a mercenary, right? They're going to earn more rewards as those eSIMs ping those wireless nodes. It's a really cool feature.
Yeah, and we think also what's going to be really interesting is that you're going to be able to, it's beneficial for your friends as well, because they'll have the option to potentially get a cheaper bill and a better service out there. So I think there's true win-win-win connectivity there, and we're really listening to the community feedback to make sure that we're tuning that right and maximize the chance to create this dream scenario of having a distributed carrier where everybody's providing their own neighborhood coverage.
Yeah, it's great because the node suppliers are also the users, right? Like they're not two separate groups of people, and PCN is a claim on bandwidth, which I love as a model. We could talk more about that another time at length.
Yeah.
But so we kind of hit on both areas here. We hit on the node suppliers in detail. You hit on the user side, right? Users can install an eSIM and get coverage to the network, or they can install a Honeybee, which is an eSIM plus those validation awards for saying where coverage is and where the nodes are. Let's talk through the experience, right? I send my parents money. I'm on their plan, right? I should probably get my own at this point, right? People
No, you
are
should go on
used
to Pollen. That's why. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Like walk us through, like, this is totally different, right? Like users have to own an eSIM NFT, right? This is very Web3 focused. You're not walking into a Verizon branch with a strip mall. Walk us through that experience.
We haven't talked about like the whole privacy and anonymity and how we're doing that. So it's really weird to me that like we still call people with like a phone number, right? And the phone number changes, right? So sometimes if you get a new number, like you get like text messages from like old people and they're calling, them and they're like, and so that's a weird thing, I think, in general. But so that's a whole different discussion. But the concept here is we don't want to have a person and a credit card tied to a eSIM. We think that that's very kind of Web 2 thing. We think like the future is really about having a digital identity that is unique but different than who you are, your social security number, your whole credit history, and everything else. Like we just want you to like be able to pay for the service that you want to use, and you can do so with your tokens. We don't need to know what your credit card history was, if you pay with Visa, American Express, or MasterCard, or whatever other is out there. It feels like, and then the identity related to that should be part of an NFT, right? That basically means like, who is this plan? Who is this user? Who's this identity? You can sell it. So the way we do that is that from our perspective, we have an NFT is represented with each of the eSIMs, and then there's a wallet that owns that. And so if your eSIM is connecting to one of the flowers and you're able to validate it, you will get a reward that goes to the wallet of the owner of that NFT. And so we think going forward that's helpful because that's the only way that we can really create a anonymous and private aspect where you can still have unique identities, but not necessarily tie that and say like, oh, this is Tommy's NFT. We now know who he is, right? I think the idea is you want to be able to know that this is a person, this is a unique person, they came back, but you don't really care to know who that is. You give them the privacy. If they want to share that with you, that's fine. We're not saying everything needs to be anonymous. We're saying if you should have a chance of being able to do that. So and it comes down to really like freedom and free speech and kind of really core to the constitutional, the foundation of what it means to be American. So, and we think NFT is really kind of the way to like create the identity and have a unique attribute for your plan and service. And you would pay in PCN instead of paying in dollars. And maybe you don't have enough PCN, and so you got to buy them from somebody else. Okay, that's fine. But we think that's the right model for this.
That's awesome, Anthony. I totally agree. Like the phone number concept is just so dated. I don't know how to ask this question the right way, but I think you'll know where I'm going with it. Under Pollen, you don't have a communication identifier, right? Like a phone number, I call you, I get you wherever your device is. On Pollen, that identifier depends on what app you're using, right? I log into Telegram, I log into Slack, what have you. Mm-hmm. Pollen is, I guess, running with the idea then that the communication is neutral and your identifier is whatever app you're on that network, right?
Yeah, so there's still some things we're working on in terms of really figuring out how to connect everything here. But right now, we provide the data connectivity, actually, we don't provide the data connectivity. The connectivity is provided by the network from Pollen. We provide the technology to make that work. The thing that happens is you're using other pieces of, when you make a phone call, you're not really making a phone call anymore. Like it is a data connection that happens to be carrying voice. FaceTime does that, Skype does that, Signal does that, same thing for text message. So the concept of like it's a phone call, like you rarely make a phone call. You make a phone call when you're in a 3G or 2G service, which are both getting phased out. And so we're like, okay, if that's getting phased out, let's just cut that whole thing out and make it where you're in a digital world and you're using digital identities and doing that. We realize that there still needs to be a way to send some text messages and be able to interact. And so we're working on figuring out a solution for doing that. But there's a lot of really good services there. And so we don't want to reinvent things that work really well. If you could do Google Voice calls and Google Voice text messages, like why are we recreating that? Like we want to create the thing that's missing, that's new. And that's really is like kind of splitting up the mobile network and making it where you're paying your friends for your service. Like imagine you're paying this company that you've never met. You don't know what it is. Go ahead and try to call Verizon AT&T service and have them like help you out. Like they're like, hey, the service sucks over here. Like imagine what that is. First of all, it's like a 1 hour wait on the phone, and then they're gonna be like, oh, we can't fix it for you, right? So
they're never gonna care.
Yeah, but but if it's your friend, or maybe it's not even your friend, it's like it's a neighbor or a friend of a friend. You'd be like, hey, I don't get coverage over here, and they'll be like, oh, cool, let me fix that, so like you can make it work. So that's the thing we want to do is like, how do we take the concept of like phone company and turn that into like a community and neighborhood relationships there, and like the idea is like get rid of the middleman and just make it where like you're connecting to your neighbor's internet to get onto the internet, and I feel like that's the right concept for that. And how we do the phone piece, we're still working on that, but stay tuned. We can do another podcast later to explain that.
Absolutely. So it sounds like there's no SIM swaps on Pollen, right? I mean, you're not, you should never use 2FA on your phone to begin with, but, let's say you have Pollen connectivity and you're using 2-factor on a phone using like a Google Voice number that's ultra secure. You can't SIM swap, Pollen's network.
I'm not going to say you can't because we haven't really thought through everything, but that's the idea, right? So the goal of what we're doing is like in getting anonymous and private, we want to be, we want to be the most secure connection you can have to the internet and the phone. And with that comes from people abusing tricks like SIM swap and then like resetting your password on your account and then stealing your money. Like that's crazy, right? And so that should completely stop. And we want to make sure that Pollen, contributes to that stopping. And I'm sure in saying that, everybody's going to start attacking and trying to figure out new holes that we'll have to plug. But the idea is if you can really stop that it's SIM swapping is a concept from 1995 or something when this whole thing was there. We've come a long way, and it feels like we should be able to eliminate that entire threat vector with exactly what you're talking about, Google Voice and other places like that.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I'm surprised we haven't. So let's round out this conversation a bit with some context in the traditional world. What is your goal for Pollen? Is it to replace Verizon, replace T-Mobile? Is it to be an offload carrier? Is it to be like a boutique niche, wireless offering? What would like the end state be for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of thinking of like, this is an analogy of like you're going from analog to digital, right? And so there's a big change of what we do. We're going from centralized carrier to decentralized carrier. And that allows you, I think, to build a new network. Are we going to be able to cover the whole US the same way that the companies have been for the last 100 years? Like, no, it's going to take a long time to get there. And so there is an interplay with them that is going to be important to get right. But ultimately, I see that this is kind of the network that like helps spreads like freedom and kind of America's values, where you're able to connect. It's a network that you can't take down because, right now we're just in the US, but we think this ultimately will go globally, and you'll be able to have people setting up in, South America in a village. There's one internet and somebody puts this and it shares, and now everybody can use that connection very easily. I think that, Europe is the same thing, Asia as well. So I feel like Pollen's kind of like the seed that's going out and growing this new concept of like, what would the world look like if telecommunications was decentralized and you could just use your phone and your Pollen SIM to connect to whatever network you are locally there. Maybe it's built by somebody else. You don't need to trust them because you're having a tunnel that goes all the way through and exits to the internet. But you're able to access that like physical bandwidth that exists there on a wireless, way. And so it's just a little bridge that needs to happen. So I feel like, the ultimate goal is we'd love to have, global connectivity and be the most secure and least expensive. And in doing that, you kind of need to fracture it where it's not owned by like 10 dudes in an office somewhere that are figuring out how to make more profit. It's like fractured and like it's every, 1 out of 5 people has a Pollen node and they're resharing their internet and they're getting a chunk of whatever the traffic is going through. And so you're like micro payments through the blockchain where you use your data and how much you spend there. So that's like longer term. I think we have a long way to get there, but that's the goal of where we want to go. It's kind of like a public service.
Yeah, no, totally. Do you think that carriers in the US or abroad would ever, do what you're doing, ship a node to somebody's house, offer them money every month? Like, do you think that would ever happen?
I don't know. I mean, I think the carriers have been moving to like they own their own towers to like they don't want to own towers anymore. They want to have Crown Castle, American Tower, and all these other like tower companies own that. And like these companies are becoming even more valuable than the actual carriers. And so in some ways, we're kind of mixing the model where everybody becomes kind of a mini tower owner and a mini carrier owner. And I think these are big companies and they have a lot of money and a lot of power, and they think through all their decisions. For them to like ship a box and be like, hey, what's up? Turn it on, and everybody can connect to it, and we'll go from there, is really difficult for them to do that. So I think it will be a while for them to catch up. But we're obviously open to working with them and seeing if there's a way that we can create that bridge for everyone faster.
Yeah, massive culture change is usually a big blocker,
Yeah,
especially
for sure.
at mega companies.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. So let's walk through a couple, potential issues or roadblocks. I mean, the one that's highest on my list is that Pollen reuses consumer internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you said earlier, you're arbing the price of wireless being so expensive and hardwired internet being so cheap. Walk through the risks there. Like, do you think that they could ever block you? Is there congestion? In my mind, it's a really good opportunity for the wireline companies to lock in their customers, but I'm interested in what you think.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that, and obviously we're speaking with a lot of them. But the concept from our perspective is it's cheaper because there's more capacity, right? And it's cheaper because when you lay a fiber to somebody's house, you can do 10 gigs easy, no problem. And you're selling them a 1 gig service now, and you can upgrade that to 2 and so forth. Doing 10 gigs on your phone is a lot of data. Not just like 10 gigabytes for 1 month, but like 10 gigabits per second. You have battery constraints, so the use case is different. And so I feel like you're only going to be a small percentage of the actual flowers owners bandwidth. There are plans out there where you get 1,200 terabytes per month for like $60. And then they go for an extra $30, you can go full on capped. I mean, 1,200 terabytes a month for $60 is ridiculously cheap, right? Like if you're thinking about it, the nationwide average for data on wireless is $3 a gig. And so just the like low price there, you're like, whoa, there's like 3 orders of magnitude difference in terms of pricing there. And so I think the capacity problem isn't really there. If anything, like, hey, let's pay an extra $5 and then you're reselling, so if you get 60, you go 65, and now you're going to do 10% more. And then those 10% are going to be for the wireless customers that are connecting to that. I also think there's like natural competition, right? Like there's the wireline providers and the wireless providers don't get along well. And then you can see things like some of them are like beaming 5G into the house to try to compete with wired access, and they're doing that as a crazy price, unlimited, uncapped for $25. And you're like, can I get that on my phone? Like if it's the same thing, like what? Wait, no, you can't. So there's clearly some competitive pressure there. And so Pollen we would like to make Pollen like a way for the wired customers or wireline companies to help put pressure and keep things on the wireless side more in check and fair, right? You saw like T-Mobile was kind of the last big innovation in the wireless side because it's very difficult to do what we're doing, right? So like there's a lot of risk, like it may fail. Like we're not sure that Pollen's going to work out, but it's worth doing, and this is a big opportunity. Like T-Mobile was very disruptive to the carriers, and it was so disruptive. Like Sprint, T-Mobile got a merge, and like we're back to 3, and like everything's good. This is different. Like you can't really do this with Pollen. Like this is like bubbling up from the ground.
The crazy part is, I mean, T-Mobile benefited from a lot of spectrum given their failed merger with, I think it was AT&T way back when. But I mean, one of the smaller things that helped T-Mobile was just very simple pricing, right? $40 a month, you get your bill, it's $40, right? It's not like 68, 37 like Verizon, like, very simple plans.
Yeah.
Like very simple consumer things help drive T-Mobile to be extremely successful. You guys are not doing small incremental changes. You're reinventing the relationship that people have with wireless.
Yeah, and we want to make it where the concept is you earn your data as opposed to you pay for your data, right? And so that would be a really big change for that. And I think it's going to be an interesting time. The next 2-3 years are going to be really interesting to watch. So,
yeah, no, totally. So next in line on concerns, I guess would be competitors, right? I guess I could speak a bit more candidly here, but I'm obviously a huge fan, one of the earliest miners of Helium. We've covered them a lot at Delphi. love the team, love what they're building. But I think one of the things they ran into was they spent a lot of their token supply incentivizing an IoT network, right? IoT is very different from consumer 5G. And now having to bootstrap 5G after spending so much on IoT could be potentially hard. We'll see if it works out. I hope it does. What's your take, though, on the competitive landscape for Pollen?
I see Helium doing something different than what we're doing. I think they're great. They're fantastic. I have some Helium, LoRa miners as well, and I would say we'd love to work with them more directly. We see ourselves as a carrier 3.0, and we see them kind of as a helping kind of offload some of the traffic, with their 5G products. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? I think that we can benefit from that. I believe the future is going to be lots of individuals owning their own towers and providing that connectivity. We want Pollen to be how you provide that connectivity, and ultimately, if you're providing, that traffic, you should get paid. And whether you're getting paid from Pollen or you're getting paid from AT&T or so forth, that's as far as we're concerned, it's the same. I would say the LoRa is an interesting application. So they've had phenomenal success, and I think there's been a lot of benefits to the users and deployments there. So we hope to make the users of Pollen as excited about us as they have been in early Helium users as well.
So that's really helpful context. I think one of the things Helium did extremely well was to get hundreds of thousands of nodes, IoT nodes, around the world, right? Mm-hmm. Phenomenal success on the supply side. I think the demand side has still been tough. I mean, obviously you need that coverage capacity to be able to sell into and provide that IoT coverage. But I guess, how are you thinking through that potential struggle on the 5G side? Do you see it as, because I view a disconnect on Helium's IoT supply side versus the demand side right now. How are you attacking that from the 5G side to ensure that there is demand?
Yeah, that's the key thing. I mean, that's why we have the Honeybee app. That's why to us, we're building two-sided marketplace. We're building users that want to connect, and we're building providers that are going to be, having flowers and providing connectivity. And what we do is we provide this anonymity layer, so it's different. So there's a reason why you'd want to do it this way, and privacy. And so driving the user base is really key towards making this a successful network. The reason why this is going to work is because people will want to use the connectivity that we're providing. We're not here to make a network that's going to go and have zero users on it, right? We want to make it where it goes both ways. And so having our own individuals be able to do that, and even if they were to connect to Helium 5G nodes, that would be a fantastic thing that we'd love to see happening. So we're really focused on the consumer user-centric piece to be able to drive that demand and create the value that flower owners would like to see happen.
Awesome. So Anthony, we have a good idea of Pollen, your target market, what you're going after. Talk to us a bit about reception to date. Like, how many nodes are out there? Talk about your last drop, which was your biggest yet.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for a couple nodes to come in the mail.
Yeah, and we're working on it. Yeah. So I would say, we launched maybe a couple months ago. Our first drop was about 100 flowers, and that took about 6 hours or so to sell out, and we were like blown away by the reception. That was like 2 weeks after launching or something, maybe a week after launching. It was like really crazy. And so about 3 weeks, and we shipped those out and so forth. So 3 weeks later, we were able to get another supply of like 150, and that sold out in 10 minutes or something insane. And then we did an even bigger drop, I think 2 weeks ago. Time is very blurry at this point from the lack of sleep. And so I would say, and so on this drop, we're going to ship out 1,500 units, including the bumblebees and honeybees and flowers themselves. So we have about 200 flowers right now that are active on the system that you can use today, right? So if you have one of our eSIMs and you're nearby and you're in a coverage zone and you get coverage, you can use the internet for free because we're in phase 1 where we don't charge for data credits. So once these other, 1,500 or so devices come online, the network's growing, almost by a factor of 10. And, there'll be another drop, obviously, in the future for doing that. We're seeing this exponential growth. Obviously, all exponential growth, tops out at some point. But we look forward to seeing that, continue to grow in the market.
That's awesome. So You're dealing with two different worlds here, right? You're totally disrupting the telco industry. You're providing a private layer, which is basically layer zero, which is data transmission for people. That's, reinventing the traditional telco world. But on the other side, you're providing this Web3 experience that is totally native to the crypto user with NFTs, with an easy way to access coverage with eSIMs, things like that. Talk to me a bit about the future of Pollen. You have plans to eventually go to a full-fledged DAO, kind of what we're used to in the crypto space. What would that sort of be like? I know it's really early days to kind of think through this, though.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I got to thank the community for their support, for everything they've done with us in terms of buying the units and deploying them and growing the network. Our view is the way to truly make this decentralized is to have, ultimately the DAO voting and appointing, kind of people to run the network, because there's a lot of decisions that are, day to day and time sensitive that you want to make. And so I don't know that voting on every single decision makes sense. I think voting in terms of electing officers that are responsible for, think of it as an election. You're voting in individuals that are going to run the company. And if you don't like what they do, there's a period by which you can vote them out. And we think that's how the DAO kind of can operate there. Similar to kind of what the, a board might be like, where they vote and they choose a CEO and they go from there. That's kind of what we see as phase 3. So phase 1 is kind of rolling out the network, proving that the concept is working, proving that there's demand, driving both sides of the network and showing that that economic engine is there. Phase 2 is adding in, data credits and a couple other things that we haven't announced yet, that will really show the economic value of what the network is happening. And then phase 3 is taking that and turning that into a DAO model, where we call it an enhanced DAO, because we're not actually just voting on should we increase the rewards in this region because of so and so. It should be these are the people that you're going to trust to make the decisions, and then they can kind of run for election and say these are the things that I believe in. Here's what I'm going to push Pollen in that direction, and then they get voted in through that.
I totally agree. We had Trax on from Urine for a Disruptors episode, and basically what they did was a very similar model, right? Token holders are always in control, but you elect these silos of extremely smart people to kind of handle all of the decisions.
And that makes sense. I mean, I think that you, as a token holder, you want the best for the network, right? You want the, in our case, you want the coverage to be up, and you want the usage to go up, and it's not clear that you want to be involved in all of the sausage making decisions. Do we have a little onion here, a little more salt? Pick the best chef that knows how to make the sausage, right? And if you don't like which ones they're making, switch them out. And I feel like that's going to be a evolution for how the DAOs become more successful.
I totally agree. And Anthony, just to close out for those listening, is there any way for the listeners to get involved? Can they go buy an eSIM? Should they sign up on a wait list for a node? What's the best way for them to get involved?
Yeah, I think the best way to kind of start off is going to be with this Honeybee eSIM. That will give you the ability to drop Pollen and share the connectivity in your area, so that you can signal to others that do want to buy a flower and make a bigger investment, and then go in and provide connectivity to capture that and make that. And that will also kind of get you a wallet, and you'll kind of understand what's happening and kind of get you into the game that way. So that's the best way to do it.
That's awesome. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for sharing the Pollen story. Super excited to do another episode in the coming months, and we'll go from there. But thanks again for your time.
Thanks for your support. It's great. And thanks for everyone for supporting us in the community.
Hey, it's Tom. Our team at Delphi Media just launched a new show, NFT Collector, where two guests go head-to-head to each build a $50,000 NFT portfolio in short 10-minute episodes. They leak alpha all along the way, so click the link in the show notes and subscribe to NFT Collector on YouTube.